Hey there, so today I'm going to review a really exciting tournament that just happened, April 21st, which is yesterday. This is a 5K tournament, happened in Florida. I think it's the largest Star Wars Unlimited tournament we've had in the US since the game's release. It had 141 entrants, and it came down to a top 16. We have some really exciting decks, and I'm going to go through the entire top 16 performances and break it down for you. First up, I wanted to just kind of go over the breakdown. So that, like I said, the tournament had 141 people enter it. Over here on the left, we've got the breakdown of the leaders. 40 entrants were Boba Fett. That's a little under 30% of the field. 22 Sabines. It's about, like 20% more or less, a little less. But we got 15 Idens, 13 Vaders, 12 Leias, and then it really starts to drop down. Interestingly, though, if we look at the right, the top 16 bracket here, 4 Bobas made it, which is 25% of the bracket. So, a little under the pace that would have been 1-for-1 with the tournament entrance, but pretty close. We had 4 Sabines, 3 of them Sabine green, 1 of them Sabine yellow. So they actually performed really well. They kind of overperformed. 2 Vader blues, really interesting and pretty exciting decks we're going to go through. A Vader green made it, a Palpatine blue, a Luke green, a Krennic green, Leia red, and a Han red. So we're going to go one by one through the top 16. I'm going to start with the winner of the tournament right here. It's Mr. Cohen. He went first place. During the Swiss, he was 6-2. He took down the entire event, beating a Boba Green in the finals. This is a blue-red pure control build. He's got not even that many units, which is pretty typical in a blue-red deck. I think usually I've seen these decks more Iden because of the heal, but what Vader does for you in a deck like this is just like give you a clock, right? This deck is not actually trying to mill you out. It does kill you, right? It controls, flips Vader, closes a game out pretty quickly with its top end of Palpatines and Avengers. Just got the full removal suite and the open fires, power of the dark side, takedown, 2 vanquishes in the main deck, 3 vigilance, which is a really popular card now in basically all blue decks, even if they're not mono blue. It's just become a very core card to any control strategy. He's got the full suite of board wipe, super laser blast, 3 of them. Even though he's a red deck, he's got 3 copies of Lieutenant Chilton. There's very few red cards in this deck, so it very reliably was a 5/5 for Mr. Cohen here. 3 entrenches, which he was using as pure removal. Just lock things down. Eventually, you super laser blast the whole board anyway. It cleans it up. It's a little bit of a non-bow with the power of the dark side, but he was able to maneuver this pretty well. I saw it often get locking down leaders like Sabine and Boba Fett, just like lock them down. He doesn't even really play any ground units outside of the Sentinel and the 1-drop. And basically, he's not really deploying Vader most of the time until he super laser blasts and then brings in Vader. He's got 2 copies of I Am Your Father. It's not a card I particularly like. I don't like letting my opponent decide what to do, but he ran it. I would love to speak with him at some point or hear what he had to say about whether or not that card actually did anything for him during the games. And yeah, other than that, his sideboard is even more healing, like repairs, devotions. He put a bombing run in there. I think nothing in the sideboard really is transformative. I think it just looked to be even more solidified against aggro, or maybe even a little bit towards control with like the Force Surrender and the Search Your Feelings. So congratulations to Mr. Cohen. He took it down. Very big tournament. It's really awesome. All right, in second place, the runner-up lost to that Vader deck was Mr. Andrew Cox. He went 7-1 during the actual Swiss. It's a Boba Green deck. We've seen this deck a lot. It's a very powerful deck. There is some interesting things to look at here, though, because Boba Green is a pretty defined archetype. Now what people are trying to do is find ways to elevate it, right? Be better in the mirror matches, maybe be better against Sabine. Interesting tech here. 2 copies of Cunning, right? So we talked about Vigilance being in these blue decks. Well, now we're starting to see Cunning come in as a 6-cost card. I think this card was probably pretty powerful into like a Sabine matchup where often Boba, when he does end up losing a game, is usually just like by a few actions. Cunning can completely flip a board, right, by preventing 2 units from attacking you and buffing one of yours, or even preventing 3 units, right, with the exhaust tube bounce. The other interesting tech here is the Gamorrean Guards, which I actually really like. I think obviously Boba wants to usually skip his 4 resource turn, but it's not 100% guaranteed that he's going to be able to do that. Again, especially against Sabine, where sometimes he's ambushing a 3-drop like a Consortium Star Viper or a 7th Fleet Defender. So having a 4-drop seems sometimes important because otherwise that turn can be very weak. What Gamorrean Guards does for you is if they survive into your 5 resource turn, it gives you a really strong, overwhelming barrage target without needing to flip your leader first. So when you flip your leader first before you barrage, you actually give up that 1 resource that you could have readied if you had destroyed something before flipping Boba. And sometimes you have to do that because you really need to get that barrage off immediately. Well, starting your turn with a 4-power unit in play can help. And again, mostly that Sentinel is relevant against aggro decks. The 4 health is a little problematic in the mirror because of Bosk, but it's something you just kind of play around with. The other interesting stuff here, we've got Recruit. I think I spoke about that a little bit in the previous video. I kind of like this in Boba. I think Boba tends to have issues sometimes where it fizzles out. It doesn't draw any of its top end. That can help. And the other thing is the Shoot First, which I think comes in and out of lists. I see it a decent amount, but it's not always like a core part of the deck. But again, I think it helps a lot in the Sabine matchup, and that's where I think most of the energy in this main deck was placed into the Sabine matchup, into the mirror, where the sideboard with the reinforcement walkers, the Emperor's Legion, the Relentless, that is all for control. Okay, so he's planning to board in quite a lot of cards for the control matchup. All right, 3rd place, 6-2 in the Swiss. We got a Sabine green deck here. You know, pretty typical list. A few shout outs here to General Dodonna. Does not always make these lists, but he makes math really annoying sometimes for your opponent. He's a must kill target. If he's able to push in any amount of damage, it's like really great. He's also strong with another interesting card here, that's R2, which is not usually thought of as an aggro card, but having more 1-drops in play gives you more targets for Heroic Sacrifice, more targets for Rebel Assault. In this case, Dodonna also buffs it, right? More things to go wide with. It plays around Power of the Dark Side, more targets for your Wing Leader, right? I think just having access to more 1-drops has become fairly important in Sabine. It gives you more action capability too, so you don't have to like play your 4-drop immediately on turn 3. You can do other things, right? You can play a 1, you can ping, you can play a 3, right? You get lots of actions before you deploy Sabine. So that's great. And 3rd place, nothing to sneeze at, did really well. And congratulations. All right, 4th place, Philip Ritchie went with a Luke Green with no energy conversion lab, notably. This is awesome to see a Luke get this far. It has been kind of not performing that well overall. I saw that he beat a couple Boba Fett's in the top 16, which tends to be Luke's weakest matchup. So something in this deck maybe was working well against there. Maybe he piloted really well. That I can't really speak to. I will note that he's playing 6 1-drops now. Usually you do see the Alliance Dispatcher in Luke, not always R2. So he really wants to start with a 1-drop with a shield. He's also playing 3 copies of Devotion in the main deck. I think probably slanted for the aggro deck, but notably being able to put a +1/+1 on either Yoda or R2 early in the game to give them 5 health is really strong against Boba. 5 is kind of a magic number to kind of mess with their flip turn a little bit, so they can't like Bosk ready a resource or like Boba get a free kill on it ready a resource, right? It means they kind of have to use their Steadfast if they want to get through. That means also using their energy conversion lab. So I think 5 is a good break point, and Devotion maybe is also a concession there. Maybe that is why he is running that card. Post board, you know, that looks almost all like anti-aggro, right? Yularans, Star Vipers, Skiffs. I'm not a huge fan of Star Viper if you're not playing Energy Conversion Lab. I think it's just too slow. But it might have helped out a little bit. He's got some confiscates. Maybe he's looking to target in trenches, which a lot of the control decks are using now, and maybe Traitorous. And he's got an extra copy of Home One, probably for the control matchups. All right, 5th place, we got Vader Green, also without the Energy Conversion Lab. This is just Big Boy Vader ramp. This is like one of the biggest Vader ramp decks I've seen. He's got 3 Ruthless Raiders, 3 Vaders, 3 Reinforcement Walkers, 3 Palpatines, 2 Devastators in the main deck, including 3 Traitorous as well. Looks like he's not really trying to beat aggro, which is fine. I think if you can kind of avoid those and just trounce a lot of other decks, I think with this build, he's probably very favored into Boba Green, probably very favored into like blue-green control decks like Iden. I didn't mention this earlier, but Iden, even though it had a very high representation in the field, did not make a single top 16 space. I think partially because a lot of these Vader decks did, and they probably just beat up on her all night. Yeah, I think this guy came with a plan. His plan was to beat Boba. His plan was to beat Control. It was not to beat aggro, which is a decision you make and you live with. Post board, he is trying a little bit with the aggro, with the Star Vipers and the bombing runs. I think Star Viper, again, without Energy Conversion Lab, is usually a little clunky. Bombing run, I've not been too impressed with what it does, and I would like to hear if he speaks, writes about this deck and kind of how he piloted his matchups to know if Bombing Run ever really was super effective. All right, 6th place, Frank Myers. He went 7-1 in the Swiss Sabine Yellow deck. This one's wild. There's like some cards I would never even think of to like put in an aggro deck, like the Aztec Liberator Gunship, the Chewbacca, like even the main deck Change of Heart. You know, it's not a lot of the spaces. For the most part, it's a Sabine Yellow aggro deck that has some game, right? He's playing 30 health. Usually this deck is has a pretty hard time beating green Sabine because the Energy Conversion Lab is such a board flipper. But mostly, you know, we know what this deck can do too, right? It's got Surprise Strike, it's got Millennium Falcon. It can push a lot of damage out of nowhere. Leia's an important card in the mirror and against Boba, just to like get that one extra action prevented. In the sideboard, he brought Fang Fighters, probably also like for the Entrench and Traitorous. The Wolf for the anti-heal is an important sideboard card. Lando's interesting. I wonder how that worked out for him. This was cool to watch. It's another really good performance from Sabine. I think Sabine was a kind of a big winner in this tournament. Had a lot of people do really well with it. All right, 7th place, Richard Douglas, Sabine Green. Now, this was the only undefeated player during the Swiss. He went 8-0. He won his first round in the top 16, but then he did lose the Sabine Green mirror to the list we covered a little earlier. This deck is very similar. He went with the full suite of pumps, right? 3 Rebel Assault, 3 Heroic Sacrifice. He's got 2 Bright Hopes in the main deck. I think probably kind of pre-boarded a little bit for the mirror match. Other than that, you know, the main deck's pretty stock. He's got the Donna here, 1 copy, 1 in the sideboard. He's got the 2 R2s. So I think R2 is kind of becoming a new core piece to the Sabine aggro deck. What's interesting for me is his sideboard. He went U-Wing, which I think probably a different angle to try to beat control decks, to try to go like really wide if the games end up going that long. He's got 1 Zeb, which can be an incredible blowout in the mirror match as well. And then he's got Consortium Star Vipers, which is not something you usually see out of Sabine, but again, could be really strong in the mirror match. Fang Fighters, we know, kind of probably for Traitorous. Wolf for the anti-heal. All right, in 8th place, another Boba Green deck. This one, you know, it went 2 resupply, so he's cut 1 ramp, which, you know, mostly I think is an issue in the mirror match. He went with 2 main deck, Change of Heart. I think that's probably slanted a little bit towards aggro decks. Full suite of Shoot Firsts. You know, again, for aggro, he is playing Cell Block Guards. I think mostly those are to pull out of Vader to give you a Sentinel. The rest, you know, this is a pretty stock list. He went with the Star Vipers main deck, which I think is very defensible if you're expecting a lot of Sabine, which there was. There was a lot of Sabine, and they did very well. Post board, you know, the spice here is Spark of Rebellion. It's going to cost 4 in this deck. Personally, I think that's a little wild to think that could be super effective. But, you know, if you're playing against these like red-blue Vader decks that are just playing Super Laser Blast and you absolutely need to nab that, maybe we can argue that we need to take a closer look at Spark Rebellion. All right, 9th place, Mike Gem from KTOD. This is another Boba Green deck. Similar things to what we saw in the 2nd place deck with the Gamoran Guards in the main deck, which I have liked. I think, like we said, that it gives you a good barrage target and a good fallback plan for if like you don't ramp. There's 2 resupplies in this main deck as well, so he's a little untech for the mirror, right? Like the ramp is the most important part there, but with 5 pieces, you're still pretty likely to hit it. He went with the recruits as well, which I like. And post board, I mean, this, other than the Star Vipers, that entire sideboard is for control, right? He's playing Reinforcement Walkers, Relentless, Emperor's Legion, a Change of Heart. This plan is meant to be able to grind with decks like Iden Green, Krennic Green, right? Those decks go long. They usually don't kill you very quickly. So if you're just able to, you know, card advantage, card value over and over, present threats, play a Vader that brings a unit, they kill the Vader in the unit, you Emperor's Legion, you get the Vader and the unit back, right? You're just playing more and more units. The Reinforcements Walkers come in, they get you a card, right? So I think that is a good angle to try to target Iden Green and Krennic Green, which notoriously have pretty good matchups into Boba Fett. And just like let your power do the talking when you're like playing at Sabine, right? You should be okay with main deck against them. You shore it up a little bit with your Star Vipers and go from there. So yeah, again, like another really good finish for a Boba Green deck. We know that deck is good. It's still being innovated on, and we'll see if like anyone kind of cracks the code for how to win the mirror matches, because I still think those are pretty random at times. All right, 10th place, a little bit of spice here. We got Leia Red with no Tarkin Town, with some interesting card choices, right? We got Benthic 2 Tubes making an appearance here. I think of all decks to play, Leia is probably the only one that he makes sense in, because her action sheet lets you kind of speed up the process of him buffing another unit. There's 1 copy of Mon Mothma here. There's 1 copy of an Alliance X-Wing, 1 copy of Bright Hope. There's the U-Wings, so you know these one-offs are a little more like utility pieces for the U-Wing reinforcement. Other than that, right, it looks mostly like a Green Sabine deck. It's Leia Red. This is an aggro deck. I couldn't get the rest of the sideboard. It was kind of cut off. I saw that they had Metal Ceremony and Wolf in there. I want to comment a little bit on the Akbar, which is actually a card I do like with Leia, but only when you're playing it with, well, let's not say only, but usually because you're playing it with Tarkin Town. I think being able to ping and kill something with Tarkin Town is really important with Akbar. There is no Tarkin Town here, which makes it a little less exciting for me. Leia Red is a pretty well-defined aggro deck. I think mostly has underperformed in comparison to Sabine Green. They are similar decks with similar game plans. She's just a little bit slower. So I think maybe main decking to go a little bigger is correct. And that's what this person did, right? Michael had 2 U-Wings, 3 Guerrilla Attack Pods. He was trying to kind of go a little longer than most Sabine decks normally would. All right, in 11th place, John Tata with Green Red Sabine. You know, good deck, good pilot, did well. He finished 6-2 in the Swiss. He only had 2 Rebel Assault and 2 Heroic Sacrifice in his main deck. You know, he also lost a Sabine Mirror in the top cut. Notably, I think in those mirrors, Rebel Assault is one of the most important cards, so maybe he'd consider playing the 3rd or having the 3rd in the sideboard at some point if he expects more Rebel Assault, more Sabine Green mirrors. The rest, you know, we've seen the R2. He opted not to have Dodonna, but he did play the Bright Hopes in the main deck. And he played Guerrilla Attack Pods in the main deck, which not all the Sabine greens were doing. The rest is pretty standard. He got the U-Wings in the sideboard. He's got Consortium Star Vipers in the sideboard as well for the aggro mirrors. And yeah, another great finish. All right, 12th place, Boba Green. So I don't have much more left to say about this deck. Randy decided to go with 3 Traitorous in the main deck, which, you know, I didn't see it in any of the other Boba Greens in abundance. So that's a different angle, right? I think in the mirrors, for instance, if you're able to resupply instead of play a super laser tech, and you like if you start your hand with like a Traitorous and a resupply, it might be just smart to avoid ground completely, because if you can resupply into a Traitorous and take their super laser tech, for instance, you can basically win the game on the spot. Other than that, Traitorous has situations where it's really good, has situations where it's super clunky. He really dug into having lots of 5 drops to play, which is something Boba Fett often wants to do. Sideboard, you know, he's not playing any main deck No Good to Me Dead, which I think is not great for the mirror match, and also probably not that great against Sabine, because it's a pretty good card there as well. But he does bring the full 3 into the sideboard, so he will have access to them. He's got the Star Vipers in the main deck. I think there's like half the list did and half the list didn't. It's a good card against Sabine, right? So if you want to be a little pre-boarded for that, you go with that. All right, 13th place, Blue Palpatine. I love this deck. Blue Palp is something I've been working on for a long time. I think made some interesting choices here. Number 1 being the Childson. I think this deck has a little too much green for my taste to run that card. And I'd have to wonder how many times he was actually able to get it to 5 health. Because if it's not a ton, then I would definitely just be running Baze Malbus in that slot. It's something, I think that 5 health is so important against the matchups, specifically Sabine and Boba Fett, to live against like a K2 ambush, to live against a boss, to live against Boba Fett attacking, right? 4 health is kind of a liability, and the most important part for decks like this is to like stall, right? The value doesn't matter that much, it's living long enough. And 5 health does the job better than 4. But he might have just been like any hand that he started with Childson, he might have just like been very focused on keeping a grip full of blue cards. So if he was able to get that into 5 health, I think Childson very powerful. Entrench, I love in the main deck. This deck has a problem with Overwhelming Barrage sometimes, in that it doesn't have very powerful units in the early game to enable a big barrage. And I think Entrench changes that a lot. It's also good on his Sentinels. I think for the most part, Entrench in this deck is not being used as removal against opponents' cards. It's being used to buff his own cards, notably Sentinels, and sometimes in preparation for a big Overwhelming Barrage. He went 1 Super Laser Blast, 1 Avenger, so he's got a little bit of big in the deck. I think usually you can kind of get away without any of that, because Palpatine himself is such a game changer when you get there, that you often don't need these like big ships. And like, he went light there, which I kind of like. I think it's just a concession a little bit to like being paired into control mirrors. But his sideboard is very much slanted to beating control mirrors, right? He's got 2 Relentless, 2 Devastator, another Vanquish, a Super Laser Blast. Most of that is for control. He is pre-boarded as well as he can be for the aggro matchup. It is still a very, very difficult ask for this deck to consistently beat Sabine. But I mean, he finished 7-1. He did very well, and I like this deck, and I'm happy for him. All right, in 14th place, it's George Hudson with another blue-red Vader. This one actually ran with Capital City, so, you know, maybe that made a difference. Dagobah seemed to go the distance. Other than that, I think these decks are incredibly similar. Again, Childson, but this is a primarily blue deck. George here had Force Throw in his deck. Which, you know, I mean, it's not a ton of force units until Vader comes out, but, you know, if you're able to get Vader out, Force Throw becomes a really powerful card. Interesting to see one Confiscate in the main deck. I'm not sure what he was super worried about, but he's got a little bit of main deck upgrade hate. He's also playing I'm Your Father. I'll have to wonder from his side too if that card ever did what it needed to. Past that, very similar list to the winning deck list. Seems to be kind of an up-and-comer now. If this deck is consistently smashing Boba Fett's, winning control mirrors, got to see how it can kind of stay the course against aggro and whether this can become like a real major player in the metagame. All right, 15th place, blue-green Krennic. It is the only like traditional blue-green control deck we saw, right? Because, I mean, we saw the Palpatine, but I'd say that's not super traditional. That's usually like Krennic green or Iden green. It's the only one that made the top 16. It is a pretty straightforward Krennic deck. It's playing a lot of big stuff. 2 Avengers, a Devastator, a Super Laser Blast, 2 Reinforcement Walkers. Only 2 Vaders, which, you know, I think you always play 3 Vaders. I can't imagine you don't want the 3rd. Maybe it was a supply issue. Other than that, you know, he's playing ECL, so he's got a good targets for that with Steadfast Battalion, since Krennic comes out at 5. Gideon Hask is another pretty good Energy Conversion Lab target. He's playing only 6 2-drops, and notably he's not playing like the Stormbike Pursuer, which I know is in a lot of Krennic lists. There's no Regional Governor in this list. So I think in many games he was just skipping turn 1, trying to power the dark side, or maybe ramp on turn 2 and go from there. It is the sideboard here. You know, he's got Traitorous, he's got Vanquish, Relentless for the mirrors, so making openings to help with his aggro matchup. There's a lot. I actually think blue-green villain is a very customizable deck, especially when you're playing it with Krennic or Iden, because those decks tend to also be able to handle Sabine aggro pretty well, unlike Palpatine. And you can kind of gear it based on what you expect to find: more Boba, more aggro, more like villain control decks, and you tailor it to what you need. And this is a cool list. He did really well in the Swift, 7-1. Unfortunately, got knocked out in the first round of the top 16. All right, 16th place, Jeff here with Han Red, the last bit of spice we have, and boy is it spicy. This is a wild deck. This is like a Han discard deck. He's got 3 Force Throws, 3 Force Surrenders, 3 K2s in his main deck, as well as 2 Bodhi Rooks, which he is paying 5 for, an extra one of those in the sideboard. This looks to be, oh, and 3 Spark of Rebellion. Sorry, a very, very important part of that, right? This is he's going for your hand all game. He's got the R2 C3PO package to kind of replenish his own, Ezra to give himself card advantage as well. Only 1 copy of Black 1, which I actually think, like, I really liked it in Han Red. I think I'd just run all 3, especially if you're going for like a card advantage kind of game plan. Yeah, he's got some spice here. 1 sneak attack just to, like, you know, get someone. 1 change of heart. A 1 Lando. 1 Waylay in the main deck. 1 in the side. This one's wild. I'm not even sure. It's like not really an aggro deck, but like definitely slanted more aggressive. But it looks to just kind of want to like aggro a little bit and then just like demolish your hand, and then from there just figure out how to win. This one looks really cool. I'm gonna be interested to see how this plays in testing. All right. So yeah, I think it's awesome that we got a 5K tournament this early in the game's lifespan. Had 141 entrants, some really cool decks, some really good players showed up. It was really exciting to watch. I'd recommend anyone go, if they can, go watch the stream from PPG Events. You can check out some of the games that they had featured there. And yeah, if you have any opinions on these decks, you want to like shout out anyone, please do so in the comments. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. And yeah, until next time, take care.